You have probably seen these photos before. A politician walking through a street with folded hands, asking people to vote for him before an election. New schemes get announced, new roads and bridges are inaugurated. Then the election season ends, the monsoon season begins, and so do the rains. Then the usual visuals of bridges cracking, potholes emerging in roads, drains overflowing, power grids failing, etc., surface on social media. But what if voting day itself was the day the rain test happened? What if elections were timed so every voter walks past the road with the same overflowing drain, the same roads filled with potholes, and the same waterlogged school gate on their way to vote? India has quietly been doing the opposite for 70 years. Let us look at why and whether that should change. Before we look at election dates, let us have a look at India's rain calendar. India's rain calendar is not just one season. The southwest monsoon hits Kerala around June 1st, moves north and east, then covers the country by mid-July and typically ends by late September. The northeast monsoon brings the bulk of rainfall to Tamil Nadu, Puducherry and parts of Andhra and coastal Karnataka from October to December. This is different from the rest of India. This regional split matters a lot for this video as we look into the election patterns in India. Now let us look at the last 3 decades of Lok Sabha elections. In 1996, 1998 and 1999, elections were held between February and October. In 2004, elections were held from April 20th to May 10th. In 2009, elections were held from April 16th to May 13th. In 2014, elections were held from April 7th to May 12th. In 2019, elections were held from April 11th to May 19th. In 2024, elections were held from April 19th to June 1st. Every general election since the mid-1990s has landed in the April to May window, right at the end of the season or the start of monsoon, but essentially never during it. The 2024 election is the closest any Lok Sabha poll has come to overlapping monsoon, and then again, it just brushed the very first day of onset in Kerala. Compare that to India's election in 1951 to 52, which ran from October to February after monsoon and before peak summer, when road and rail movement was easiest across a country with far less transport infrastructure than today. State elections show the same avoidance pattern, just with more variety because states differ in climate. Bihar typically holds elections in October or November, more than a month after the southwest monsoon ends. Kerala, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal, Assam, and Puducherry typically hold elections in April, just before the southwest monsoon begins. Maharashtra and Haryana typically hold elections in October and November respectively, almost 2 months after monsoon. Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, and Delhi typically hold elections between November and February in the winter when it's fully dry. Uttar Pradesh typically holds elections in February or March in the winter or early spring. Karnataka typically holds elections in April or May in the summer season. Notice the pattern. Almost nothing lands in June to September, the peak of the southwest monsoon across most of the country. Even Tamil Nadu, a state that gets flooded frequently, gets its elections scheduled in summer. Municipal and local body polls are harder to generalize. They are run by state election commissions on staggered, delayed schedules, but where dates are available, they tend to follow the state-level logic. Administrations avoid scheduling public gatherings and door-to-door campaigning during heavy rain. So the honest answer to the question, are elections held in the monsoon season, is never by design. Election commissions, central and state, have converged on the instinct for 70 years. Schedule around the rain, not through it. That raises the question this video's about. Is that instinct actually serving voters or just serving logistics? Holding elections during or right after monsoon could be an idea for few reasons. First, it gives a real-world stress test to the infrastructure. A road looks fine in April. The same road in July after 6 weeks of rain tells you whether the contractor used bitumen and built proper drainage or cut corners and built a bad road. Monsoon is the season that load tests public infrastructure. Drains, power grids, roads, footpaths, school buildings, hospital roofs, etc. Holding elections when that test has just happened means voters are judging performance, not promises. Second, it shifts the campaign conversation. Right now, campaign season tends to center on big-ticket announcements like new metro lines, new hospitals, welfare schemes, A post-monsoon election forces political parties in power to answer for the boring but critical stuff. Did the drain overflow? Did the school flood? Did the new road survive one season? Did the new bridge not fall? That is more relevant to quality of life than a ribbon cutting. Third, it matches how voters already experience the government. Most people do not evaluate a government by reading a 5-year infrastructure report. They remember whether their street flooded in July. An election that lands right in the monsoon lines up the vote with the concrete evidence voters actually have. Fourth, the Model Code of Conduct locks infrastructure in its condition right when it matters most. The moment the Election Commission announces dates, the Model Code of Conduct, commonly known as MCC, kicks in. The MCC is a set of ECI enforced guidelines governing how parties, candidates, and the government must behave from the moment election dates are announced until the results are declared. Basically, it freezes the government's ability to use its own power or public money to influence the vote once the election clock starts, and to the point until voting ends, the government cannot announce new projects, lay foundation stones, promise road construction or drinking water fixes, or inaugurate any scheme, even ones already budgeted and sanctioned. Officially, the only work allowed to continue is what had already started on the ground before the code came into force. Now line that up with a monsoon-timed election. Monsoon is when roads crack, drains clog, and footpaths wash out. And it's also exactly when a government under pressure would normally rush in emergency repair crews and a fresh coat of asphalt right before voters show up, if elections are scheduled during or immediately after monsoon. The MCC's timing works in the voters' favor. The freeze on announcements and last-minute cosmetic works falls right on top of the period when infrastructure damage is freshest and repairing is most tempting. Voters end up judging the road as monsoon actually left it, not as the municipality hurriedly patched it up the week before polling. Compare that to the April to May Lok Sabha pattern. Elections land in the driest part of the year, months after the previous monsoon's damage has already been quietly repaired, and well before the MCC could ever freeze a rushed monsoon season fix. The MCC's rules are simply not protecting voters from repairs, because by April there's almost nothing left to superficially repair. It's already the dry season. Fifth, it aligns politicians' self-interest with building all-weather infrastructure. Right now, a candidate's road just needs to look good on inauguration day. Dry season, cameras out, done. But if elections are held during or right after monsoon, a damaged road doesn't just embarrass the government. It can physically cut off voters from the booth. In hilly flood low-lying pockets, exactly the terrain where a few hundred votes decide a seat, a landslide-blocked road or a washed-out bridge on polling day means those votes simply don't get cast. That changes the incentive completely. A politician who wants to win a constituency now has a direct selfish reason to make sure the road or bridge in that specific constituency survives monsoon. Not because it's good governance, but because their own re-election depends on their voters being physically able to reach the booth. It turns all-weather road from a slogan into a turnout strategy. A quick worked example to illustrate on screen. Constituency X has 4 leg voters spread across a market town and about 30 surrounding villages. Politician A is the sitting MLA, and internal surveys show the race is close. He's projected to win by a margin of roughly 3,000 to 12,000 votes. Of those villages, 6 sit across a low-lying stretch that floods every monsoon. In a dry season election, this never mattered. The road is passable by April. So those 6 villages vote at normal turnout and nobody thinks about the road until the next monsoon breaks it again. Now suppose the election is moved to September right after the monsoon. Politician A's team runs the numbers. Those 6 flood-prone villages hold about 9,000 votes combined. In the last flood-timed by-election nearby, turnout in similar villages dropped by nearly 40% because the access road was underwater or washed out on polling day. A 40% drop in a 9,000 vote pocket is roughly 3,600 votes that simply don't get cast. And politician A doesn't know in advance which side those missing voters lean. His projected margin is 3,000 to 12,000. A swing of even half those missing votes is enough to flip a close result. Politician A can't control who those 9,000 people vote for, but he can control whether they're able to vote at all. So in the 2 years before the election, he has a direct, self-interested reason to push for a raised all-weather causeway instead of the low bridge that floods every year. Also, he would need a backup approach road so at least one route stays open even if the main one floods. None of this is because politician A suddenly cares about road infrastructure. It's because a flooded road on polling day is now a direct threat to his own seat, not just an inconvenience for voters he can apologize to later. The road gets built properly, not out of virtue, but because his re-election math depends on it surviving the rain. Sixth, it pushes campaigning online. Door-to-door campaigning, road shows, and outdoor rallies, which is the default toolkit of campaigning, become genuinely difficult in heavy rain. Muddy lanes, flooded colonies, washed out rural approach roads make physical campaigning slower, riskier, and less effective. That pushes candidates to lean harder on digital outreach like WhatsApp groups, social media, video messages, live streams, etc., to stay visible to voters they can't easily walk up to. Digital campaigning only works if voters can actually receive it. A candidate who wants their reach to work in a monsoon election has an incentive to push for reliable electricity and mobile or internet connectivity in their constituency, especially in semi-urban and rural areas where power and network coverage are lost first when it rains. That's another category of infrastructure. Power grids and telecom towers getting pulled into the same accountability logic as roads and drains. And on the days political candidates do travel in person, the incentive works both ways. They are relying on the same roads, bridges, and embankments as everyone else. A collapsed bridge or a broken road doesn't just leave voters stranded, it can leave the candidate themselves marooned or injured. That's about as direct a stake in whether this road survives during monsoon as a politician can have. Then there are also reasons why holding elections during or right after monsoon might not be an idea. First, there is a risk to turnout and access. Flooded approach roads, disrupted transport, and damaged polling booths can physically prevent people from voting, which includes handicapped voters and old people, especially in flood districts, the people most affected by drainage. Those lying in poorly serviced areas are often the people most likely to be cut off from a polling booth during active rain. That is a risk of discouraging the voters, the very idea that was meant to empower them. Second, there are security logistics to consider. The Election Commission has to move EVMs, paper trails, and security personnel to 1 million polling stations, including hill and forest areas. Washed out roads and landslide risk in states make this dramatically harder and slower during monsoon. Third, elections during peak monsoon compete directly with the work window which farmers depend on for their year's income. Fourth, there are health and safety risks to consider. Waterborne disease outbreaks like dengue and general monsoon illnesses spike in this period. Large gatherings at polling booths and campaign rallies during rain add a health cost. Finally, there is no single monsoon season to design around. Because the southwest and northeast monsoons hit states in months, there is no single national date that would work as the monsoon election for the whole country. Now imagine this. The rain has stopped, so the risk of turnout and problems with logistics are low. The damage from the rain, like cracked roads and flooded areas, is still visible. The voters have not forgotten it yet. That is the answer that we can find in the data. It is not about voting in the rain, it is about voting in the 4 to 8 week window right after the rain stops. This is before the problems with the roads and other things get fixed for the cameras. Putting the two sides together, voting during monsoon, highest infrastructure visibility, but real risks to turnout, safety, and access, and it would disproportionately hurt the most vulnerable voters it's meant to help. Voting in dry season, February to May, which is when most Indian elections already happen. Easiest logistics, but infrastructure looks its best in dry weather. Voters are essentially judging government on its least tested state. Voting 4 to 8 weeks after monsoon ends keeps the safety and logistics benefits of dry season voting, while still catching infrastructure in its tested condition. Cracks, potholes, and drainage failures are still visible and not yet patched up for an election. This window also lines up the MCC's freeze on announcements and foundation stone laying with the exact period governments would otherwise use to rush monsoon repairs. Because monsoon timing varies by region, the best time isn't one national date. It's a principle which state election commissions could apply per region. States hit by the southwest monsoon, which is most of India. Ideal post-monsoon window is late September to early October, already roughly where Bihar, Maharashtra, and Haryana sit. States hit by the northeast monsoon, Tamil Nadu, Puducherry. Ideal window would be January to February after that monsoon clears, closer to when Delhi and UP already vote, rather than the current April slot, which is actually the driest and least tested time of year for TN. For the Lok Sabha, which has to run one schedule across all these climates in staggered phases, anyway, this is already partially happening by accident. Phases run across April to June, catching some southern states just as their dry season peaks and missing the real test entirely. Shifting election dates is a politically loaded process. The ECI has to weigh security, festivals, harvests, and assembly term end deadlines all at once, and monsoon is just one input among many. An achievable fix that gets the same accountability benefit without moving a single poll date. Mandate a public photographed infrastructure audit at the end of every monsoon. Roads, drains, schools, hospitals, published before campaigning starts. That gives voters the idea whether the infrastructure survived the rain, which is the whole idea, without adding turnout risk to the ballot itself. Now here's something most viewers wouldn't have heard. It's the strongest evidence in this whole video that election design can force real infrastructure change as a side effect without anyone ever intending it to. When India rolled out EVMs between 1998 and 2001, the goal was simple: stop booth capturing and fraud. A 2017 study by economists Shishir Debnath, Mudit Kapoor, and Shamika Ravi found something nobody was looking for. Using NASA nighttime satellite images as a stand-in for how electricity in a constituency actually was consumed, they tracked electricity supply before and after EVMs arrived, and found it rose sharply as each election cycle went on, up 9.2% in the second year after a poll, 12% in the third, and 23% in the year right before the next election in constituencies that voted electronically. Why? Because EVMs made it dramatically harder to rig a result. Once a politician's win actually depended on voter preference instead of manipulated counts, the cheapest, most visible thing they could do to win real votes was make sure the lights stayed on before people went to vote again. Nobody designed EVMs to electrify villages. That was an effect of removing a politician's ability to cheat the count. A purely procedural fix to how votes are counted ended up changing what politicians had to deliver. That's the precedent we're sitting with. The EC didn't set out to fix India's power grid. It fixed how votes are counted, and infrastructure delivery improved anyway because the incentive structure underneath elections had shifted. Monsoon timing would work the same way. The EC wouldn't be issuing a single order to build better roads. It would just be changing when the test happens. If the EVM story tells us anything, it's that Indian politicians respond fast and rationally when the rules of winning actually change. It's not just elections that follow this pattern. Look at UPI, launched by the RBI's National Payments Corporation of India in 2016 as a payments product. Nobody at the RBI was in the telecom business, but UPI is useless without a smartphone and a mobile signal, so as adoption exploded, India now runs over 10 billion UPI transactions a month, with more than half of internet users living in rural areas. The demand for mobile connectivity in places that never had reliable signal exploded right alongside it. A tool built to move money ended up dragging telecom infrastructure into villages that policy alone hadn't reached in decades. Two different institutions, two tools with completely different stated purposes: fraud-proof voting and cashless payments. And in both cases, infrastructure that was never the actual goal got built anyway because the incentive underneath it shifted. That's not a coincidence twice, that's a pattern. So here's the real question. This video is actually asking, should the Election Commission use election timing itself as a lever to force infrastructure development in the same way as EVMs without mentioning a single road or power line? Ended up getting villages electrified simply by making elections harder to cheat. And the same way UPI, without ever mentioning a single telecom tower, ended up dragging mobile connectivity into places that had never had it. The evidence says the mechanism works. Over. A procedural decision, how votes are counted, changed what politicians had to deliver to win. A financial decision on how payments moved changed where telecom infrastructure had to reach. A procedural decision of when votes are cast could possibly do the same thing for roads, drains, and footpaths by making sure the day voters walk to the booth is the same day the monsoon has just finished testing everything they're working on. It wouldn't be free. Turnout risk, security logistics, and the agricultural calendar are all costs, and we've walked through why they matter. The story about the EVM shows something worth keeping in mind. Sometimes the strongest infrastructure policy isn't a plan, a budget, or a ceremony. It's simply choosing when people cast their votes. So, what do you think? Should the ECI schedule elections in the dry season to ease logistics and favor the politicians? Should it schedule elections in the monsoon season at the expense of its logistics and force governments to build all weather infrastructure for the sake of the people? Or should it hold elections right after the monsoon season? Let me know your opinions in the comments below. See you in the next video.